Okay, let's try this again. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Toby.
So do you want to let's do the short. This is if you're just tuning in for the first time. We had some internet problems, which happens, and we're gonna start over. Our theme today is food and privilege in travel. This is part two of our Wellness on the Road series. Sarah, do you want to give a little background about yourself and why this is interesting to you?
For sure. You and I, we always want to connect and figure out ways to work together, and we're always in kind of various places around the world and find each other. Mostly in Guatemala, actually, we found each other, and it's interesting because as people who identify as like travelers or as digital nomads, um, and well as being environmentalists and culturally sensitive and all of that, I think that this is a really important series that we're doing along with the conscious travel academy that NuMundo is putting out for people who are looking to begin a nomadic lifestyle or who want to integrate travel more into their year or years. For me, a little bit about myself, like I'm definitely an environmentalist, and so it does bring up certain things with traveling for me and really having that desire to travel. I'm also an herbalist and a permaculturist and really curious about different bioregions and, predominantly based here in Costa Rica. I've been here for 10 years and love traveling around this big little country because there's so much to see here, but I also really love getting out. Almost every year I go on an extended travel stint, like I try to stay kind of grounded here in Costa Rica for, about 6 months a year. And then another few months a year, I'm out and about checking things out in the world.
I'm in a similar spot right now. I'm actually on my extended travel of the year. I'm currently tuning in from Athens, and I'll be around Europe for the next, still have another month before I head back to Costa Rica. And it is, and yeah, speaking of privilege, we are so privileged with the work that we do to be able to take months at a time and be elsewhere and to bring our work with us on our laptops and take calls in different time zones. All of that is really, I'm very aware all the time of how many blessings I have in my work to be able to do that, to do all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like this concept of privilege brings up a lot for me. And even for us to be sitting here having this conversation, is quite privileged because privilege is about the freedom of choice, and there's all different kinds of choices that we make. And so it's like we're privileged to try to make ones that are the least negatively impacting and or impactful and the most positively impactful, not for just like our lives, but also for the lives of our close people and the people who we're interacting with as we travel as well. And I think with like privilege, there's some of us are born into it, like you and I, we were both born in the United States, and so we have privilege just with our passport in general. Like we
100%.
don't have to really think about visas as we go into different locations. And some of us, we've earned privilege based on merit, academics, based on work, connections, those kinds of things. Sometimes offer privilege in a different way, and like especially like with this kind of social privilege and meeting people and making connections, and all of a sudden having access to a whole different kind of places to visit and places to stay and those kinds of things. Um, like living here in Costa Rica and thinking about the privilege that, we're a tourism based country, specifically in ecotourism. And so a lot of our economy is situated around that and depends on it. And you'll go into these places and same thing with like other places that we travel, like you and I both spend time in Guatemala every year. And it's like, we're going there for these like cultural experiences, for connecting with our social network, for doing give back. A lot of times, like with at least with some of my travel, it's for give back. And so, like being around these people that we're so privileged to spend time with and get to experience their countries when they would never have the opportunity to experience ours, or to even like think about like, wow, how can I even get out of my town to go to like the big city? It's like you think of like for us, and when we go to Guatemala, it's like the folks around the lake. It's like, how often do they even get to go to Guatemala City? Like, that is a huge privilege and a cost that's not accessible to them.
Totally. I think it's worth reiterating. We said this on our first go, but that's gone now, is that we're not here today to tell people, oh, this is the right way to travel, or this is the right thing to think, or also we're not here to say you should feel bad about your privilege. I think this is a lot more about opening a conversation and being conscious of what we carry with us into the world, and to ask questions, and to really, ask questions about it.
I think there aren't any right or wrongs with this conversation. It really is about going internal into, like, what is your own personal ethos, and what is the impact that you want to make in the world in general, and some people might not even care, about what it is. They just want to go and have the experience. They want to try the food. They want to see the culture, and they want to go back to their lives, and there's so many different kinds of people that do travel or venture out, and so we have tourists, and I'm myself a tourist, like, I hate calling myself that, but it's true. Like, I go to certain places because I want to see, the remnants of ancient cultures. I want to see, like, there's a reason everyone goes to Cinque Terre, right? And like Italy, there's a reason people come to Lake Atitlan. It's like, yeah, we're doing that in Guatemala. We're doing that because it's like these, like, awe-inspiring, amazing places, and they're popular for reasons. It's like, we don't go to ugly, terrible places. And the tourism industry is rising. I mean, it's a part of development strategies for countries, and so you go into certain places, especially like Italy, for example. If you ever plan on going, if you go in the summer, it's like Disney World. There's so many people around, and it's just like, it can get really cheesy, and like, and it's like, I don't want to associate my tourism with that, and there's some people who, will take just a holiday where it's like, they want to go and they want to be on the beach. They work really hard. Maybe they have 2 weeks off a year, 4 weeks off a year, vacation time that they're able to take, and they just want to go and relax. Like, for me, traveling isn't relaxing. It can be. Like, I do put in very mindful relaxation time, but like, I travel because I want to experience culture. I want to try different food. Being, I'm a naturalist, I'm an herbalist, I'm a permaculturist. Like, learning a new bioregion is really important for me in my teachings, because when I teach permaculture, it's not just about the specific bioregion that I'm in teaching. It's about global systems, and how is the world working, and looking for things that are, the uniting threads between all the ecosystems, but also like what makes them really unique. And so, like, I intentionally will go to do new bioregions because I want to see the plants, and I want to look at the landscape, and I want to explore the woods, and I want to see the fungi and try the food and all of that, and then there's this whole, like, amazing wave happening now. It's been the past few years of like digital nomadicism, so people who are independently employed or working for, on projects or with companies like you, that don't have one home base, that can really be anywhere in the world, and be, generate an income and a livelihood for yourself that way. And so those digital nomads don't necessarily have like a home base. Like, I don't consider myself a digital nomad because I have a home base. I come back to Costa Rica, and I will root here for many, 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 many months of the year, and then I travel out. So I consider myself more of a traveler than a nomad. And then there's like, some people travel for, volunteerism or volunteerism. It's like they want to do something specifically to give back, or there's like doing relief work, those kinds of things. And some people just travel to study. Like, some of my early travels was doing study abroads in university, and coming to Costa Rica for the first time, studying tropical ecology. I did a study abroad in Italy, like in Rome specifically, studying art history. And so we have all these different intentions on like, why are we putting ourselves into possibly uncomfortable situations or very comfortable situations outside of our home base?
I know why I put myself into uncomfortable situations. It keeps things interesting, and dynamic and challenging. And I feel like I grow so much more when I'm traveling, when I'm getting lost, when I'm, I need to make an effort every single day just to communicate. All of those things really push me to grow, and they push me to move beyond my comfort zone, wherever that is on any given day, and to challenge myself.
Yeah, I love
And
the growth zone. It's like when we're
mm-hmm.
home or we're comfy, it's like, like how much do we put ourselves outside of that comfort zone? And some people, don't really like that. And like for folks like you and me, that's how we learn.
And the zones are different for everyone. I think it's a really good practice to pay attention to, okay, when do I feel really comfortable and homey? And when do I feel like I'm being challenged, but it's a good challenge? And when am I just panicking and having an anxiety attack because it's just too much all at once? And those lines are going to be vastly different for every person. And I think it changes with experience, and it depends on personality. But
where you are,
mm-hmm.
where you decide to travel to, it's like you travel to places and it's very familiar immediately. Maybe you speak the language, or you can pick up language easy, and the foods feel familiar, and then you can go into places where you're like, oh, this is a little bit of a challenge in your growth, and then you can go into places where you're like, whoa, I don't belong here. Maybe you don't feel safe, because those are also, and that's what part of your teachings as well is about, self-defense, and really like keeping that firm boundary, which is such an important tool and skill set for people to know. Like if you are wanting to get on the road or in a plane or in a boat or on your bike or walking, wherever you want to go, and like your travel experience is also about your personal safety and well-being.
Absolutely. And all of these are actually, I'm just noticing we're touching on so many themes that we do bring up in the Conscious Travel Academy. And that's launching, if you are tuning in now, NuMundo is launching a online virtual learning program for conscious ecological travel. It's launching July 1st. There's a link to it in the description, but we talk about so many of these things, about planning a trip that sort of suits our needs, and getting really clear on what that is, about setting good boundaries, about consent-based culture, about mindfulness and wellness on the road, which Sarah is contributing to. So there are so many elements that I think go into making a really meaningful growing experience for someone. And we can tailor those to our specific needs, but the elements are constants.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So some of the things, with privilege and food in particular, like there's 8 forms of capital. This is something I teach in permaculture, specifically through like the social lens. The majority of like our current paradigm, our current worldview is based on financial, biological, and material capital, right? Which is a real thing as we're traveling. It's like you have X number of dollars or euros or colones or whatever you have, pounds, to travel with. And like, okay, and so right then and there, like how long can I be gone? What kind of a lifestyle can I live while I'm on the road with the amount of cash that I have? Maybe you're going to be planning on putting some of your travel on credit and then working it off later. It's like, that's all personal prerogative. And so then when we get into these new countries or new cities, states, like wherever you're deciding to be, tourism is a part of development strategy for places. And so there is cash flow that's happening and an expectation of people on the other side, that like you're a tourist, there's tourist prices. You know how that goes, where it's like, okay, do I have the tourist menu right now, or do I have the local priced menu? Totally. And that's a real thing, and it's funny because as travelers, we get really offended by the tourist prices. But really, it's like we aren't from there. And so it's like we need to positively contribute.
Yeah, such a good point, speaking about privilege and food and travel, not just food, but consumption in general. When we're a tourist consumer traveler, which we always are, we're almost always making purchases, exchanging currency for goods or services. And it's so common. I've seen people getting into arguments with tuk-tuk drivers over $1. And that dollar, maybe it is more than the local price. But the question I'm asking is that what is the, big problem with paying $1 more because you're a tourist?
Right.
And for a lot of people, it's the principle of it, but I think that's a really important question to ask yourself is, what's driving you to try and bargain this down $1? What's driving you to get in an argument with the tuk-tuk driver over 50 cents?
I'm the one that gets in the argument with the guy who's arguing. Like, really? Like, you're a traveler right now. Like, you're so privileged. Like, even if you don't have a lot of cash, you are here and they're here and they can't go where you're from. I struggle with that a lot. Like, I try to be mindful of like what's culturally appropriate, like the whole like tipping or like how I'm using my money, because there is exploitation that can happen of people of all backgrounds, not just like children or women, but like everyone has the potential to be exploited in some way. And so I think that's a big part of the mindful impact that we have to make, and the research that we need to do before we go into certain places. Like, what is this bioregion? And especially because we're supposed to be talking about food today. So it's like, what is this bioregion? What's seasonal? What's being grown? What are they exporting? What kind of chemicals are they using? Who are these people growing our food? Who are these people serving us right now? Because we are paying for services a lot of times, and I remember being in Tulum like some years ago and really struggling because the cost of my breakfast was what the server was making a day. And I knew that because I'm aware of the realities of certain situations, and I was struggling even being able to eat. I didn't feel right eating my breakfast that again cost what he made. And so I think that it's really important to investigate a little bit deeper, and even looking into certain things like other major countries' investments into the country that you're in. Like, for example, when we go to Guatemala, it's like textiles. So this is like a cultural form of capital that the Guatemalans have, which is their beautiful textiles, their language, but it's mostly about textiles when you go there, right? Everyone comes back with like their cool like stuff and wants to buy blankets. And when I go to Guatemala, I always want to buy blankets and bring them home to the farm that I spent a lot of time at.
The blankets are really beautiful.
They're beautiful, right? But the crazy thing is that there are Chinese-owned factories in Guatemala City producing Guatemalan textiles, right? And so it's like, how do you know then like what is legit and what's not? And it takes you going like the extra mile of like, okay, asking like, hey, who made this? And also paying attention to like the repeat kind of patterns. Like when you see the same thing, like you can kind of tell when things are being mass manufactured. So it's looking for some of the stuff that's like a little bit more unique, a little different, because you're right. Like we are consumers. Like we're taking breath right now. We're drinking our tea, like we're consuming. But as we go to other countries, we also go with like the intent to consume. Like I'm going to Morocco this summer, like next month, I'll be there. Woo! And, one of my things I'm thinking about is like, I want a teapot. I'm going to buy a teapot and I'm going to travel for another month with my teapot. And so like, it's like the intent to consume sometimes when we go, because it's a part of like, the material capital and the cultural capital of these places that we want to experience, and like getting some like cool jewelry or like something different to wear. It's like, it's a part of like the badge of the traveler is wearing something eclectic.
Yeah, and bringing it back to food, because we're going to talk in our next webinar more about mindful consumption at large, and especially plastics and carbon footprint. But when even talking about food, it's more work to ask all those questions and do the extra research and seek out products that are actually made locally and fairly and sustainably. All of that takes work. It's a lot easier to eat wherever and buy whatever food products from whatever store to bring back as gifts or as souvenirs. But I think it's really worthwhile, and I know you'll agree, Sarah, to take that extra step and find a cooperative that's producing coffee or cacao or blankets, or in Morocco, argan oil is a really big export and produced at a lot of different levels. And you might pay more, and you might pay the tourist tax on top of that, because you're paying not only for ethical production, but also for you know, these labels and these buzzwords that tourists are more and more looking for.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
for me as a traveler, all of those extra costs are actually really worthwhile, and the difference in cost is nothing compared to the difference in quality, and also the enjoyment that I can take from something that I buy in that way.
Absolutely, you know, and it goes even deeper into like the philosophy of like right livelihood. It's like, what do we want people to be suffering because of our choices? And it's not just people, but also animals, bioregions, water systems, those kinds of things, you know. And it's like, for me, I think that goes into like the kind of touching on like triple bottom line business and like mindful economy, and like, okay, like what is my bigger impact? I mean, because like, you know how the phrase goes, like ignorance is bliss. Like sometimes don't you wish you were ignorant? And it's like you would enjoy things in a different way. But it's like, for me, knowing that like not being ignorant and like really having a higher level of education around like what is around impact, especially environmental and social impact, like being hyper mindful of that, it's like my consumerism actually makes me feel good, because I know that like this person is going to benefit off of my privilege right now, and I don't want my privilege to be exploitive. And you know, it's like it takes more effort. You're right, and I think though that effort has a bigger reward, you know, that ripples out beyond us.
So I'd love to dig in a little bit into finding a balance between mindful consumption,
Mm-hmm.
feeling well and feeling healthy, specifically talking about food and the eating choices we make,
Mm-hmm.
and being open to new experiences and adventurous eating, or, you know, trying local cuisine. So how do we find like a happy medium between those three necessities, or those three motives?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing, you know, like for me, because I do have a few food restrictions, there's an old Chris Rock comedy stand-up that was talking about like vegetarianism is like for the privilege. Like it was early. It was like in the early 2000s. It wasn't even going into like all the different kinds of food choices that people make now. You know, and so it's like if you're a vegan, or if like you're raw and that's your diet, you're going to struggle traveling typically, because it's a niche kind of cuisine, you know. And so it's like if you're going into like some European countries and you're like a raw fruitarian, like you might suffer, and not be able to find the foods that you want, depending on the time of year. And so I think like if you do have a very strict diet and a very like niche diet, for example, like the extreme of a raw fruitarian or a raw vegan, you're going to want to travel in like spring and summer, and really looking at like the bioregion and like what is local to that bioregion, knowing that you might not be able to get exactly what you want. And that's one of my favorite things actually, is like I consider myself a flexitarian, mindful, omnivore, locavore. You know, like I'll put all those titles on myself, because but being like a locavore, it means like really eating from that bioregion. And so like my favorite thing is seasonal fruit. And you know, so like some of the research you could do for yourself is like, okay, where's the farmer's market? And like, let's find the farmer's market, because right there, you're going to touch them with locals. You're going to be able to see like what is organically grown, because globalization is real, you know. And so it's like a lot of foods are shipped in. So for example, if you're coming to Costa Rica to travel, if you're eating an apple because you love apples and like that's one of the fruits that you normally eat, like if you're eating an apple, you're eating an apple that came from Chile, from New Zealand, from Washington, from Oregon. Like it is not, there are some Costa Rican apples and they're very distinct, but people wouldn't actually pick that one up. They'd probably go for Fuji instead. And so it's like you have to kind of shift your mindset of like, I'm not going to get exactly what I'm accustomed to and maybe exactly what I want. And so, you know, let's be open to trying something different. And so if you're a very picky eater, you may suffer traveling, because it's definitely like, for me, that's one of the highlights is trying new cuisine. And sometimes with that though, and like that being a picky eater, you and I were talking about this offline, is like when someone else is cooking for you, like maybe you're doing a homestay, or maybe you're, you know, visiting with a friend who's from that area and you're eating with their family, and to be like, oh, well, actually, no, I can't eat that. Sorry, thanks. You like pushed away. It's kind of rude, you know?
That
And
used
it's
to
like,
be me. When I started traveling, I was a vegetarian, and I was doing homestays, and I was a guest, and I was often turning things down. And I happened to be in a region, I was in Nepal at that time, and there are a lot of Buddhists who don't eat meat. So a lot of people understood, but I still didn't like turning down food. And that was a big factor in what decided me to go back to being an omnivore. And I love now when I'm traveling, especially right now, I'm visiting a friend in Athens, and her parents are also staying with her and cooking. And I love being able to say, I eat anything. I love being able to eat whatever's on my plate, even if I'm not sure what it is, or going out to eat with a friend who's local and knows the cuisine and saying, you know what, you order the best things from this town or from this region, and I just want to try what you think I should try.
absolutely. You know, when I was in Greece last year, like I'm pretty mindful of the oceans and like how much I'm taking from the ocean. And I really try not to eat very much seafood or fish or anything. Or if I do, I try to do like mindfully about how it's raised, like farm raised, whatever, small ships, small boats, you know, lying caught, all that kind of stuff, right? I'm like heavily mindful of it because I live on the beach in Costa Rica. And so when I was in Greece, though, you know, it's a very like fish based culture. I was in the Cyclades, and it was so cool, like seeing in every single little taverna, like the people coming in off the boat with their catch, you know? So it's like, okay, right away I was like, I'm going to eat that fish because it didn't come off a trolling boat, you know? And it's like, I can see that I'm supporting local economy. And I would go in, and the first thing that I would ask was like, hey, can I see your catch for the day? You know, and they would open up like this box, like a cooler of, you know, whatever shellfish they had and other whole fish. And I'd pick out exactly what I wanted. You know, another part of their cuisine was roosters. You know, like if you went inland, like they had these like roasted roosters that they were eating. And so I'm like, okay, like really paying attention, because I was cruising around the island, and because I have an eye for agriculture, I wasn't seeing factory farms. I was seeing like small family based farms. And for me, as like an omnivore, it's all about and again, this is my personal preference, like not putting on to anybody else, but seeing that the animal was humanely raised and humanely slaughtered is a really big one for me. And like when I was in Vietnam, you know, which is a country of 80 million people, and like I did my research, I'll sit there and just like read through The Lonely Planet, like I was traveling with The Lonely Planet in Vietnam, and you know, their main export is rice and coffee, like for the food. All the rest of the food in that country stays in country to feed 80 plus million people. And when you went into the markets, what I loved so much was that they didn't want to see dead animals. They wanted to see that their animal was healthy and alive, and then they would buy their live animals and then kill it. And so it was this like a closer relationship to the food system, specifically the animal food system, than some of us have living in other countries, especially like here in Costa Rica. It's very easy to go to the supermarket and buy packaged meat, you know, because we do have factory farms here, especially chicken and pork. Beef here in Costa Rica, though, is all grass fed, doesn't go to feedlots. And so it's like, okay, I know this. I will eat beef in a restaurant. I won't eat chicken in a restaurant because I won't eat factory meat, you know, whereas like if I was at a family's house and they're raising their animals in the backyard, like I would eat those. You know, I remember being in New Orleans, and like one of the things that are very a popular cuisine there is alligator, you know, and they actually do raise alligator. And I was like, all right, like I'll try an alligator po' boy, you know. It's like that's a part of the culture, you know, until like it really stuck sometimes in your own dietary dogma can really, I think, take away from the experience of the culture, you know, and seeing like what is these people's relationship with food, and how, you know, what's important to them and what's delicious to them, and like what do they eat every day, and what is their own health and longevity like, you know. It's like the amount of olive oil and fresh fish and those kinds of things that we see in Greece. Or it's like, you know, you said at one point, I remember if it was in this call or in the call that dropped, about when you lived in Paris, you know, and like that cuisine is quite different, you know. And like how is that for you living there and having the Parisian lifestyle?
Yeah, so I lived in Paris when I was 18, and I was in a homestay with a wonderful elderly lady named Madame Poupon. And and so I was trying to be vegetarian, but I also was eating just whatever she served, which was often chicken and all sorts of, French dishes, a lot of cream, a lot of butter. And I think at that point maybe I was just trying not to eat red meat. I can't remember, but I remember asking sometimes in like a patisserie where they make pastries and little quiches and things if something had meat. And the answer sometimes, and this is true in a lot of different parts of Europe and through the Mediterranean, does this have meat? And the answer might be, oh no, it just has pork. Or no, there's just a little bit of this animal product in it. And it's just, we have,
Oh no, it's just chicken.
yeah. And so we have, or no, it's just fish. And we have different perspectives. That's a cultural thing of what even constitutes meat. I wanted to say though, I'm so with you in terms of wanting to experience a culture through its food. And that's, for me, a priority is trying everything. And that's one of the reasons that I am a flexitarian, is that I want to taste everything. But I think it's really key for any traveler to get clear on what their priorities are. Because for me, a priority is tasting all the food. For someone else, a priority might be sticking to whatever their code of ethics is around not eating animal products. And that's a totally valid choice if that's what their choice is.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot of respect for people who make that choice and live by it and live by their principles, whatever they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think like
But
when
it's a
we have
trade-off.
a very strict diet, we have to go into places then they're going to be able to cater to us.
Right.
Like, so it might mean that like you are more metropolitan. You might not be able to get out into the countryside and because in the more metropolitan areas they're more diverse, possibly a higher level of education, more like hipster culture, and so you'll be able to find like a cool juice bar or like the places that you're, where you're going to be able to get like your vegan cuisine or like raw foods and stuff. And then there's some places, like when I was traveling in France 2 years ago, I really suffered because I have a dairy allergy. But I was in France for like a week and everything was so delicious. And so I made the mindful decision, like I'm going to eat dairy and I'm going to suffer right now. And I had a sinus infection for 2 weeks, but I got to enjoy the cuisine. And so, because like to get something that's dairy free in France, and I'm stereotyping, but it's true. It was really hard, really, really hard to find food that did not have cream. Butter I can handle it, like cream and cheese, it was like in everything,
And it's so delicious.
It's so delicious. And so yeah, again, it was a conscious decision to suffer.
And that's the thing, that's such a key point for me about mindful eating, is that making a mindful choice about what we eat might not always mean doing what's the best thing for our body.
Yeah.
And maybe it will, but I think it's about just like really knowing what the choice is that we're making and not just doing whatever's convenient or whatever looks tasty necessarily, but thinking about it and asking the questions and doing the research and then saying, you know what, I know that this has dairy, but I'm going to eat it anyways. Or saying, you know what, I'm going to travel to this other place because it's better suited to my dietary restrictions. Mm-hmm. It could go either way.
And there's so many options for lodging now to have your own kitchen. Whether you're in, if you're in a hotel, kitchenette, like it depends on your budget, of course, but like there's so many cool places right now. They're like the mix of like the hostel hotel, catering to like the digital nomad, to different income brackets where you also have like a kitchen. So what you could also do is cook for yourself a little bit and like go and explore the markets, and then bring like the fresh produce or the animal products or whatever it is that you want to eat within your ethos back to your place and cook for yourself. Can also be really fun. you know. And like for me, when I'm traveling, I do try to always stay in places where I have access to a kitchen, whether it's like an Airbnb or if it's like those upgraded hostels kind of thing. And then I also travel like with some of my own food. And so I always have with me like bee pollen, for example. It's one of the supplements that I take every day. And I'll wait till I get to a new country and then I'll go to the farmer's market because everywhere has bees. And we need to be supporting our beekeepers, small beekeepers. And so I'll go straight to the market and I'll buy bee pollen. I'll go straight to the market and I'll buy like a vinegar and I'll buy some oil and I'll buy, you know, some basic foodstuffs because I'm used to traveling heavy, you know, like I'm not a lightweight packer, mostly because, and we're going to talk about this next time, but because I always have my bag full of metal canteens and cutlery and that kind of stuff, but it's like my food bag. And so I'll have in there, you know, like jam. And, you know, when I was traveling in Spain and France 2 years ago, you know, like I went to, you know, these smaller markets because you'll see like big Iberian like shanks of pork hanging around that, you know, aren't like wild fed pigs. And so I was like hunting out, you know, the slowfood.com is a really, like, especially if you're traveling in Europe, the slow food website is a really good one to educate yourself from on like, okay, how do I find certain restaurants? How do I find people who are mindfully growing their food, organic food, looking up like the organic standards? Because for example, like the organic standards in the United States is the conventional European standard. And so pretty much like you're getting high quality produce if you're in Europe. Animals is variable, you know, depending on the country and depending on the city and what you're buying. And so like I was like seeking out the restaurants and the delis and those kinds of things that were associated with slow food. And I would go and I'd buy like some cured sausages and I would have like a bread and I would have, you know, like my fruits. And so again, I travel heavy because I like to have, while I'm very open and flexitarian, I also like to have what I need available to me. And so I think that's a part of like the mindful travel. Like if you want to travel light, then like really start to think about like, okay, I want to travel light. I don't want to have to carry around all my foodstuffs. And so you're going to have to be a little bit more flexy at that time.
Absolutely. We're running short on time. So is there anything that we haven't covered that you think is just really key?
Oh, let's see. So I think some of the key things, again, like check out slowfood.com, the Conscious Traveler Academy. There's so many resources in there, from, you know, safety while you're traveling to, you know, how to pack, how to choose locations, and really do your research on the seasonality of your bioregion. You know, like if you only have 2 weeks off a year, let's think about it. Like, okay, can I only take it in the summertime? Can I take it in the wintertime? Like, where do I want to go? When is not only the best weather, but like if you're really thinking about food, like what foods are available, what produce is local at the time, and then also thinking about like the effects of globalization in reference to food. And so, you know, like, am I going into this country where, you know, the dairy is actually not coming from this country and it's being imported? Like if you go to Jamaica, for example, like the dairy is coming in from other countries. It's not Jamaican dairy. And this is a part of like effects, bigger effects from like, you know, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund affecting the development of certain countries. Really thinking about going a little bit deeper in your research into like the tourism industry itself and like who is being impacted along the way. You know, like maybe it means instead of staying at a hotel or a hostel chain, you're really looking to something like that, but in like what you're looking for, but localized. You know, thinking about like digging into websites and asking questions. Like, don't be afraid to be kind of annoying and ask questions. When people can't answer your questions, then maybe it might not be the right place for you, or they might just not have the answers, and you might need to dig a little deeper. You know, when we're talking about carbon footprint, which we'll talk about a little bit more next week, you know, just like it's a really simple there's a bunch of them, like carbon footprint calculators, but carbonfootprint.com can also like help you figure out like, okay, like what is my impact right now just from the travel alone? And then thinking about some of like the other forms of capital. So I just talked about like financial, biological, material. As digital nomads, we're also thinking about like the social capital of like meeting new people and making connections. Cultural capital is huge. You know, like this is why people, again, for the most part, tourists, a lot of it's also biological. Like here in Costa Rica, it's biological capital of our forests. and our rivers and our water systems and our mountains. And that's why we have a tourism industry. And, the intellectual and experiential capital, the spiritual capital. And so it's like going in for yourself, like, why do I want to visit this place? What am I drawn to? What am I going to bring home that's going to, enrich my life, enrich the people's lives around me, enrich your teachings, enrich your work, those kinds of things. Like those are all, things I take into consideration when I travel. Like, what is my impact? Because, the reality is, in a somewhat selfish way, the reason why I travel is because it might not be available to us in the near future, just with the reality of petroleum and everything. So as an environmentalist, it makes me feel a little squirmy. And so, really, yeah, think, I guess that's what I want to leave people with, is just like, think about your impact, the impact on your personal self, your families, your communities, and the communities that you're visiting. Do we have any questions or anything like that? Questions or comments?
We can answer, if there are any questions, we can answer them in writing after.
Okay.
I think that's a good place to leave it, and we will let you know when part 3 of this webinar series is. It'll be coming up soon, and we'll go deeper into mindful consumption, carbon footprint, plastics, fuel, all of that. If you came into this late or you missed the beginning, Sarah is one of our contributing teachers to the NuMundo Conscious Travel Academy that's launching July 1st. There's a link in the description. And she also has a course coming up called Permaculture for the Herbalist's Path in Guatemala in September, October. And there's a link to that as well in the description. Sarah, thank you so much, as always, for your insight and for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Toby, so much. And safe journeys to everybody out there. And reach out if you have any questions. And definitely check out NuMundo.org, the website in general, because you'll find so many resources on other impact centers you can go to, volunteer opportunities, how to meet up with other people. It's a great website, aside from just the Conscious Travel Academy course that's going to be offered.
Thank you. Yeah, and keep this conversation going. Ask more questions in the comments. We'll revisit those later, or maybe bring them up in the next segment of this webinar series, and bring up these conversations with your friends, with other travelers that you meet. I think the more people talking about it, the better.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
See you guys soon.
Safe journeys.